Hi guys, and welcome to another video. And my week is over. The week is finally done. I've got 2 nights off. But because it's my day off, I've had to obviously fit in appointments. And I've just got back from my chiropractor's appointment. Now, I've been going to a chiropractor's for probably the best part of 10 years, I would say. I do have an issue with my back, which I just go to the chiropractors every couple of months, get it a bit cracked, get it sort of straightened out and looked at, just to make sure that nothing goes wrong. Normally what happens if I don't go, and I haven't been for maybe 3 months or so, is that my back goes and I end up probably spending maybe 1-2 days in bed. So I go to the chiropractors. Now, I sat my chiropractor down, Dean, really good guy, has helped me with videos before for my golf channel, where I spoke to him about sort of golf injuries, different things like that. But what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd sit him down and just ask him some questions about sort of maybe some of the stuff that we go through as dog handlers, and maybe some of the injuries that we can pick up and maybe how to prevent it. So what I'll do is I'll cut over to me and Dean, I'll ask him a few questions, and then I'll come back and maybe we'll have a bit of a roundup.
Alright, cool, fire away.
You fire away?
Yeah.
Right, Dean,
Yes.
as a dog handler, there are some certain parts of the job where you're going to maybe get some injuries or you're going to get some niggles.
Yeah.
Some of the things that I've thought of, obviously as people that spend lots of time in vans, now it's not a case of being like a lorry driver where you're driving a lot, but you are stationary in a certain position.
Yes.
What I've found is like reclining the seat. Would that be more beneficial in terms of like a posture?
Yes.
Because if you're sitting like bolt upright, etc. But what are the common things that you find from people that spend lots of time sitting in vehicles?
As you said, a lot of the mechanics to do with sitting mean that there's a lot of tension in the system. So sitting is a lot of pressure on your back, full stop, regardless as to kind of almost the chair that you're in. So if you can play around a little bit with the seating position, it does make a little bit more of a difference in terms of comfort and also just longevity. Because if you're going to be sat for a chunk of time, bolt upright, that's probably going to be harder on the system than if you had maybe a little bit of a decline. Now, obviously don't fully recline because you've got a job to do, but you do want to take some of the slack out of the system so the muscles aren't working as hard, as long. So that's one of the things. The other thing that makes it quite tricky is that, of course, to support that, because you're doing it quite regularly and for such long periods of time, your body does learn. So over a period of time, it will start to figure out, well, how do we maintain that? And with that comes a degree of rigidity and tension. The problem, of course, is that when you're not at work and then you're then walking around on site or you're then pottering around at home, you're going to get that same degree of tension. So as best as you possibly can, it just boils down to breaking up that posture as often as you possibly can, safely and comfortably. So you can't get up and go out every kind of 20 minutes, but if you've been sat for a little while and you've watched a movie or you've listened to like a podcast or something, when that's finished, fine, maybe get up, have a walk around, check the site, maybe walk around the car, have a little bit of a loosen up and then go back to what you were doing before. But anything you can do to keep the muscles somewhat guessing so they have some variety rather than 2, 3, 4 hour stints of just being compressed or just being in one position, that's going to be beneficial to kind of keep the system healthy and feeling good.
Is there a link between people getting sort of numbness in the legs when they've been sitting in a period of time? Is that a link to anything above the waist?
Yes, it probably will link more likely because of the compression side to the circulatory system. So anytime you're getting numbness, tingling, pins and needles, that kind of thing into the legs, as chiropractors, we're thinking, well, is that coming from the nerve or is that coming from potentially blood vessels or muscles? So obviously, if you're sitting for a chunk of time, you'll find the muscles will get tight. But it's like a tourniquet. If you squeeze your arm tight enough for long enough, you'll start to get symptoms into your fingers. But of course, when you let go and you move around, that should ease off. So if you find actually, yes, I do get numb, kind of tingly feet sometimes, that's quite natural because your body needs movement to kind of keep things flowing. And if that movement slows down or grinds to a halt, then things can start to kind of come out of the woodwork. If you get out the van and you're walking around, you think, well, within a few minutes that's easing off, all right, fine, maybe it's just the mechanics. If you're finding actually that doesn't change, whether I'm sitting down, standing up, walking around, etc., then there could be some neurological component, but that's probably to do with the joints maybe not moving as well as they could be. So it's always worthwhile getting that checked out if that's the case.
Cool. In terms of our job and patrolling, we will patrol maybe soft ground,
Yeah.
uneven surfaces. We may be patrolling sort of concrete surfaces, etc.
Yeah.
Is there common things that you would find, like maybe different injuries that you would maybe find between them two surfaces? And what would be the best footwear that would help both of them situations in terms of maybe like ankle joints, knee joints, etc.?
That's a really good question. I hate sitting on the fence on this one, but it does boil down to personal preference. I think you have to put your safety first. A lot of the times, if you're going to be on site, depending on where you are, you've got to consider, okay, well, safety comes first. If there's going to be broken glass or there's going to be other bits and pieces, you're going to need to wear maybe not the most comfortable, but the best functioning boot for that kind of environment, if that makes sense. So you're going to have to trade off a little bit of comfort to make sure that you're protecting yourself, because that's the most important thing. You will find, of course, with the terrain, if you're going to be walking around on softer ground, that instability for your brain is not the best. So rather than fall over all the time, it will create tension in the system. So we do sometimes find people that are out, let's say, hiking, or they're doing off-road walking, or for our dog handlers, if they're on around soft ground. That instability is good because it creates, almost a sense of like core training, really. But on the flip side of the coin, it can sometimes cause tension around the kind of calf. You can get kind of tension in around the hips and stuff because you don't want to be sliding around too much. But really, I would say the most important thing for that is to make sure that you've got footwear that you can sustain comfortably for the length of time you're working. We would much rather hear that you've got footwear that keeps you safe rather than, they're really comfortable, but it doesn't really serve me on site and I have to replace them all the time because I've got a hole in it or I've put something through the sole or that kind of thing. So that would be our advice, I think, when it comes to kind of footwear. In terms of the injuries, it really depends on, again, what you're doing on site. If you're up and down hills and it's quite uneven, to some degree that can cause tension around the hips, hamstrings, calves. But again, the more you expose the body to that, in time it should actually get used to it. So it's almost a case of practice, so we say safely. But if you're finding anything that isn't quite calming down, even with obviously a length of time where you've been on a job, again, it's worthwhile getting that checked out in case there's a mechanical reason.
Cool. There's one injury that I've maybe not got, but I've started to feel over the course of doing this job, and it's more in the shoulder. Now that might be from when the dog hits the end of the lead. You've got 40 kilos banging onto the end of the lead. That can go through wrists, shoulders, etc. But it can also be maybe that you're doing a continuous check on the dog, and the shoulder starts to become a little bit. I don't know whether tired or whether you get a bit of an injury in there. Is there what can you do to maybe prevent that sort of injury, especially because obviously if you've got 40 kilos that keeps hitting the end of the lead quite a lot, that's quite a lot of power going down one arm. Is there any way other than obviously making sure that the muscles around that are good? Is there any way that maybe you can help prevent any injury?
I think the best advice for that would be to try and create somewhat of a buffer. So, as you've rightly said, I mean, if let's say the dog's 40 kilos, right? That 40 kilos is fine until they move, because you could probably double that because of speed and velocity and stuff like that. So, in actual fact, you might be putting, say, 100 kilos through, which is fine if you train your shoulder to kind of manage that kind of force and load. So, it's a tricky one because most of your work, like mine, is going to be kind of here down. If you're checking the dog, they're going to be here. If you're holding them, the lead's going to be kind of this height. It's never really up here or out to the side. So what you've got to try and do is make sure that your shoulder's always taking through a full range of motion, because if we're sat for a period of time, you look like a madman if you're just flaying your arms around. So most of the time, they'll be kind of here, or you'll be here, or you'll be texting or whatnot. So if you take your arm from there into then this position where it's fixed and holding, your brain again gets used to it and it thinks, well, do I need to do anything other than just hold it tight? And that's where things can feel a little bit uncomfortable, because other muscles now think, well, if they've tightened up, I will. So then the whole thing starts to play out. So anything you can do to kind of open up the shoulders, to kind of keep it supple and take it through a full range of motion is useful. And then from a training perspective, if you train the shoulder strong, it should be able to tolerate those forces. So any exercises that work the whole arm, and we talk about those compound lifts like press-ups or shoulder press, where you're working multiple joints all in one go, those kind of things are really useful. Hopefully then, if you train it strong, when you're holding a dog and the dog goes and you resist, it's not like it's going to cause an injury. It's less likely to cause an injury. But again, sometimes your body will create tension for strength. So if you're holding a lead and it knows actually you could pull, it will just hold it tight, which is fine. But then when you're not holding the lead, it's not going to think always, well, maybe I'll just calm down now. It might still have that residual tension, which is where you think, well, I'm not in agony. It just feels stiff and tight because it's ready for the next time we're like this in the van, or we're on site holding the dog, or we're doing different things. So training it to kind of have that bit of a buffer means that hopefully it should tolerate things and you're less likely to get injured.
You're not just a chiropractor. I know that you do some sort of stuff with like mental health,
Yes.
or like the mental side of being a human.
Yeah.
Obviously, we spend lots of time alone. Maybe it's just us and the dog. That's for maybe 12, 15, 24 hours, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Do you have any maybe tips or any ideas of obviously how people can look after their mental health, so that especially new people that are really coming into the job and like it's new to them, maybe they're not scared, but they're apprehensive.
Yes.
Is that a word, apprehensive?
That'll work for me. Yeah.
They have some apprehension of maybe what could happen,
Yes.
because maybe they're not experienced, maybe they're just a little bit uncertain in the job. Do you have any tips of maybe how people can cope a bit better mentally to look after themselves?
I think this is where it pays to reach out to people like yourself and other people that have been doing it for a little while, because I think you're going to be best placed to give advice and tips and things that you found useful as well, because you've been in that environment. So there's going to be a little bit of crossover with other things. So I mean, I know as a parent, sometimes when the kids were small, the only person you speak to is somebody who's like just can't really speak properly, and you think, damn, it'd be nice to have an adult conversation. So of course you and the dog, or you on your own, there's no one else to kind of bounce any ideas off. So you have to try and get that stimulation externally. So I think, of course, there are things like podcasts, there's videos, there's obviously, you can Netflix or whatever, as long as it's not interfering too much with your job, but also it's stimulating those different senses. So whilst you're, for example, at work on site, think about the senses that you have. What can you see? Like really, what can you see? The different things. What are you looking out for? Why are you looking out for them? What can you hear? What like distances can you hear sounds from? Not just on site, but just try and work the senses a little bit, just to kind of keep them guessing, if that makes sense. And then of course it's really important to reach out to people. So we are designed as human beings to be together. There are going to be elements of all of our lifestyles and work sometimes where we are going to be in isolation. So how can you get around maybe being a little bit like, man, I wish I had someone to hang out with or talk to if you're on your own for 12 hours. You can't really get around that unless you pick up the phone and you start calling people all the time, but you've got a job to do. So you try and make sure that you are reaching out to people that have been doing it for a while and see what's enabled them to do it for so long. Because those people that can't handle it, of course, will go off and just do something different. So those people that have been doing it for maybe a year, couple of years, or even longer now, have been doing it for a reason. They found something that works. So reach out to them and see what they found, whether that be, do you know what, I listen to podcasts, or I just play music, or I meditate, or I do whatever, exercises whatever. Do you know what I mean? Find out what works for them, and then you can pick and choose and play around with it and see what suits you best. But from a mental health perspective, it's really important, if you are struggling, to reach out to people that are in that environment and see what's worked for them. And just try and make sure that you're keeping your senses stimulated. So what can you see? What can you hear? How can you make sure you're keeping yourself hydrated, but you're giving yourself variety with the types of foods you're eating? So it's not the same thing over and over and over again. You're keeping the senses kind of not on edge, but you're just keeping them guessing. You're giving them some variety, because that really helps to keep it healthy, for the better word.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, more than a pleasure.
You're Dapper Chiro on Instagram.
Yeah,
I'll put it down in the link below. Dapper Chiro on Instagram.
Yeah.
I know you do you put up good morning messages and all that. I'll see that. I'll see that when I'm going to bed.
Now you've got to like it. That's what I need.
All right. Thank you very much, Dean.
Absolute pleasure. No worries.
And there we go. And as you can tell, Dean, really solid guy, obviously very knowledgeable about being a chiropractor, because that's obviously what he does. But he's also a very good guy for sort of the mental health stuff as well. And I think some of that mental health stuff will help dog handlers as well, because it is a very lonely job. Maybe just give you some ideas of stuff that you can do. In terms of like looking after yourself, injuries, etc., I think Dean's given some really good points in there about training the body, letting the body get used to stuff by doing good repetitions and different things like that. But I think with chiropractors and dog handlers, I'm not talking about everyone, but I think in the industry that we're in, we're quite hardened into just sort of shrugging off or ignoring an injury. But I think it is important in this industry, easy for me to say, that you look after yourself, and going to see a chiropractor and just sort of getting maybe a once over every now and then, even if it is every just couple of months, just going there, getting a once over, making sure that your body's right, because this job is hard work. It's a lot of walking. It's obviously, look with the dog as well, there's lots of power going through your body, and just making sure that you stay on top of any niggles and making sure they don't become proper injuries, I think is very important. So I hope you liked this video. I hope you found something useful in it. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe down below for loads more videos. If you've got any questions that maybe I can ask Dean on my next appointment, I can sit him down and ask him again. If you've got any comments, put them down in the comment section below. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you again next week. Cheers for watching. See you later.